My 7-year-old grandson mistakenly took my daughter-in-law's work iPad to school. His teacher called me. "Ma'am, you need to come down here immediately." I rushed over to the school. The police were already there. An officer led me into a separate room. What we found in there is terrible. Look, when I saw it, I couldn't believe it. I'm glad you're here. If you are watching this video, please like it, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you are listening to my story of revenge from. I want to know how far it has traveled. That morning, I woke up to the familiar calm of a new day. At 67 years old, my mornings usually start slow, gentle. The old radio on the kitchen shelf hummed with the constant murmur of the news. Today, they were saying something about a traffic jam downtown. Suddenly, the telephone rang, sharp and piercing, tearing through the silence. I jumped and spilled a little coffee on the table. Quickly wiping my hands on my worn-out apron, I answered, my heart beating a little faster. On the other end of the line was the voice of Miss Albright, Leo's teacher at Lincoln Elementary. Her voice was trembling, hurried, as if she were trying to hold back a panic attack. "Mrs. Miller, you need to come to the school right away. Something happened, something serious with Leo." I felt my heart clench, as if someone were squeezing it. 1,000 horrible ideas raced through my mind. My God, did the boy fall? Did he hurt himself somewhere, teacher? I nearly shouted, my voice breaking with fear. I imagined Leo lying somewhere, his knees bleeding, or worse, that he had had an accident on the playground. "Miss," Albright hesitated, her voice filled with discomfort. "It's not that, but you have to come to understand." I didn't have time to ask more. My mind was spinning, with only one thought. I had to get to Leo now. I quickly grabbed the old cardigan hanging behind the door, without even turning off the stove, not caring about the coffee pot sputtering away. I ran out into the street, my legs trembling, but trying to walk as fast as possible. The world around me seemed to fade. I could only hear the thumping of my heart in my chest. In the cramped taxi, the driver looked at me in the rearview mirror. "In a big hurry, ma'am?" he asked, his voice curious. I didn't answer. I just shook my head, my eyes fixed on the traffic outside the window. In my mind, an image of Leo appeared. That boy with curly hair, with his little hands that always squeezed mine when we went for a walk. If anything happened to him, I don't know how I could go on living. Leo is my light, the reason I still get up every morning with a bit of joy, even though life is no longer easy. When the taxi stopped in front of the school gate, the scene I saw froze me in my tracks. 2 squad cars were parked right in front of the playground, their red and blue lights flashing nonstop, like daggers in my heart. A few parents were gathered nearby, whispering, with looks of curiosity and concern. I overheard a few words: police, device, serious. Each word was like a hammer blow to my head. I pushed my way through the crowd, nearly running toward the office where I sensed Leo was. Upon entering the small office, I saw Leo immediately. He was curled up in a little ball on an old wooden chair, his little hands clutching his backpack as if it were the only thing protecting him from the whole world. His eyes were red and swollen from crying so much. His little boy's face was filled with fear. I wanted to run and hug him, to tell him everything was going to be okay, but my feet felt nailed to the floor. The principal, Mr. Davis, stood up from his wooden desk and approached me. His face showed concern. His voice was low. "Mrs. Miller, we found that Leo brought a device to class that contained some very strange things." Before I could understand what these strange things were, the door burst open. Detective Harding entered, a tall man with a serious face. In his hands, he carried an iPad carefully sealed in a clear plastic evidence bag, the kind I had only seen in police movies. He looked me straight in the eye, with a cold, emotionless gaze. "This is your daughter-in-law's work iPad, Mrs. Jessica Miller," he said in a firm voice. "When we turned it on, we saw things that I think you should see with your own eyes. Jessica, my daughter-in-law, the wife that Mark, my son, was always so proud of, the mother Leo adored." I felt a chill run down my spine. Jessica worked at a large pharmaceutical company, always busy with meetings and business trips. That iPad, I remembered Leo telling me he had taken it by mistake from his mom's desk, thinking it was his to play games on. I scolded him for being careless, but I never thought the consequences would be so severe. Harding motioned for me to follow him into a small adjacent room. As soon as the door closed, all the outside noises, the parents' murmurs, the sound of cars disappeared. It was just me, Harding, and the iPad on the table. He unlocked the screen, and what appeared made my world fall apart. In front of me were not math homework or children's games like the ones Leo used to play. It was a completely different world, a world I never thought could exist in my family. Long messages, full of sweet words, that were not for Mark, but for a man named Julian. Photos being sent, not of the family or Leo's birthday, but murky images, full of secrets. And then, bank transactions with enormous figures, business documents filled with terms I couldn't understand. I flipped through page after page, my hands trembling, with a lump in my throat as if someone were choking me. "What? What is this?" I whispered, my voice broken. Harding didn't answer right away. He just looked at me, with an expression between stern and compassionate. "We're investigating," he finally said. "But what's in here indicates that Mrs. Jessica Miller is involved in illegal activities, very serious ones." I collapsed into the chair, feeling as if my body didn't have an ounce of strength left. Jessica, the daughter-in-law I thought was the perfect woman, hardworking, attentive, loving to her husband and son. I remembered the night she cooked for everyone, the way she smiled at Leo, how she held Mark's hand. All of it now seemed like a charade. I thought of Mark, my son, who had given his whole heart to his wife, and of Leo, that innocent child who was now sitting outside, scared and not understanding what was happening. Detective Harding's deep, cold voice sounded like a sharp cut, snapping me out of my daze. "We are going to hold on to this device for the investigation. You can't take it." I stayed there, my hands still trembling, nodding like an automaton. In my head, the images from the iPad kept swirling. The messages, the figures, the secrets I never imagined would appear in my family. I wanted to ask more. I wanted to understand why, but my throat was dry. I couldn't say a single word. A young police officer, in a pristine uniform, entered with a folder in his hand. He read in a monotone voice, as if completing a routine procedure. "Evidence seized at Lincoln Elementary School, from student Leo Miller, 1 iPad device, serial number." I stopped listening. I only felt my hands shake as I took the pen to sign the report. My signature came out crooked, a scribble that reflected the chaos in my mind. Leo, my innocent boy, was now caught in a mess that not even I, a 67-year-old woman with life experience, could comprehend. A female police officer, slender and with a soft voice, approached Leo. "Hey, champ, want to come with me to the playground for a little bit?" she said, trying to smile to calm him. Leo looked at me, his eyes still red, and then, obediently, he took the officer's hand and left. Seeing his small back walk away, I felt my heart ache. He's only 7 years old. At this time, he should be running with his friends, not huddled in the principal's office surrounded by police. Miss Albright was nearby, her hands clasped, her gaze full of guilt. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Miller," she said in a trembling voice. "I was just going to open the device to check Leo's homework. I never imagined." I looked at her, wanting to tell her I didn't blame her, that it was all a terrible misunderstanding, but I just nodded slightly, too weak to speak. In my head, everything was a tangled mess. Jessica, my daughter-in-law, whom I trusted, whom I considered an exemplary mother and wife, was now connected to things so dark I didn't even dare to think about them. As I left the office, I overheard the police officers whispering among themselves. A name was repeated, like another knife in my heart: Julian Vance. I didn't know who he was, but that name sent a shiver down my spine. It was like a shadow, a threat I couldn't yet see clearly. I took Leo's hand tightly and led him out of the school. The group of parents was still there, their curious gazes following us. I lowered my head and quickened my pace, just wanting to escape those stares. On the taxi ride home, the driver looked at us in the rearview mirror. "These are scary times," he said, clicking his tongue. "The things kids bring to school these days." I didn't respond, just squeezed Leo's hand tighter. The boy was silent, his gaze lost out the window, but I knew he was scared. "Grandma," he suddenly said in a tiny voice, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to take Mom's iPad." I hugged him, trying to hold back my tears. "Don't worry, my love," I whispered. "It's not your fault." But inside, I knew this went far beyond a simple mistake. When we arrived, the house felt empty and cold. Mark, my son, had left for work early. It was just Leo and me, in a heavy silence. I quickly made him some chamomile tea, hoping the gentle aroma would calm him. Leo sat at the kitchen table, hugging the mug with his little hands, but his gaze was still distant. "Grandma, what are they going to do to Mom's iPad?" he asked. I didn't know what to tell him, so I just stroked his head and said, "Don't worry, I'm going to fix everything." On the table, the evidence seizure report was still there, my trembling signature a reminder of what had just happened. I picked up the phone and dialed Mark. 1 ring, 2 rings, and then just a busy tone. My son wasn't answering. I thought about calling Jessica, but my hand froze. The serious image of Detective Harding, the messages, the photos on the iPad, it all came back to my mind so clearly. I didn't dare face her, didn't dare ask her what she was hiding. In the afternoon, I sent Leo over to Mrs. Peterson's house, my good neighbor. "I'm just running to the grocery store for a bit," I lied, "just to have a moment alone." But instead of going to the store, I walked aimlessly through the familiar streets. The images from the iPad wouldn't stop spinning in my head, the sweet messages, the enormous figures, the documents full of secrets. I stopped by a tree, leaning against its old trunk, trying to breathe to calm myself. But the fear clung to me, like a shadow that wouldn't leave. I thought about Mark, about the years we had spent together. When my husband died, Mark was the only one by my side, my support. And now, I had to tell him the truth. That the wife he loved, the mother of his child, might be living a completely different life. My soul ached. I didn't want to shatter my son's happiness, but I also couldn't let Leo grow up in a family full of lies. That night, when Mark came home, I knew I couldn't stay silent any longer. I had to tell my son the truth. I sat at the dining room table, holding a cup of now cold chamomile tea, watching Mark silently eat each spoonful. Leo had already eaten and was playing with his toy cars in a corner of the living room. Jessica was still there, playing her part as the perfect wife and mother. She cleared the table, smiled sweetly, chatted with Leo about his homework, as if nothing had happened. Seeing her, I couldn't help but shiver. How could someone act so well when just hours before I had seen her terrible secrets on that iPad? I tried to stay calm, to keep my gaze from revealing the suspicion that was burning inside me. I waited for Jessica to go into the bathroom and for the sound of running water to fill the house. Then I got up and pulled Mark out onto the balcony. The cool night air blew, bringing the scent of pine from the neighbor's yard. Mark looked at me, his eyes tired. "Mom, what's wrong? Why are you so tense?" he asked in his deep voice. I took a deep breath, trying to gather my thoughts. This was my son, whom I had raised, whom I had watched grow up. How was I going to tell him that the woman he loved might be betraying him, that his family was about to fall apart? "Mark," I began, my voice trembling. "Today, at Leo's school, I saw things that I don't want to believe. But I can't not tell you." I told him everything, from Miss Albright's panicked call, the scene with the squad cars in front of the school, to what I saw on Jessica's iPad. The loving messages, the bank transactions, the secret documents. I blurted it all out in one go, as if stopping would make me lose the courage to continue. "I saw it with my own eyes, Mark. The police are investigating, and they mentioned a name, Julian Vance." Mark frowned, his gaze filled with confusion, but then he shook his head, as if trying to push my words away. "Mom, that's absurd," he said, his voice full of disbelief. "Jess is my wife, Leo's mom. She would never do something like that. It must be a misunderstanding. Someone could have used her iPad, or it's a very bad joke." I took his hand, trying to make my voice sound calm, though my heart was pounding. "Mark, I don't want to believe it either, but I saw the messages, the photos, the figures. The police kept the iPad as evidence. You have to believe me." Mark's patience seemed to run out. He pulled his hand away, threw the cigarette he was holding to the ground, and his eyes flashed with anger. "Mom, you're trying to make me doubt my own wife," he shouted, his tone higher than I had ever heard. Don't you see how tired I am? I work all day to support my family, and now you want me to believe Jess is cheating on me? I don't want to hear any more. His words were like a stab wound. I wanted to scream at him, to shake him so he would snap out of it, but I just stood there, helpless, watching my son turn his back on me and go back inside. Just then, the bathroom door opened. Jessica came out, her hair still damp, and a towel over her shoulders. She looked at Mark and me, with an expression of surprise. "What's wrong, honey?" she asked in her soft voice. But I noticed a flash of tension in her. Mark turned to his wife, and his gaze softened instantly, as if all his doubts had vanished in a second. "Nothing, sweetie," he said, his voice light. "My mom's just worrying too much. I'll always trust you." Jessica smiled, a perfect smile, but I caught a fleeting moment of panic in her eyes before she covered it with her false sweetness. "Mom, why would you think that about me?" she said. Her voice choked, as if holding back tears. Did I do something wrong? I wanted to scream, to unmask her, but I remained silent. Her words were part of a play, and I knew I couldn't win against her in that game, not now. Dinner that night was as heavy as lead. We ate in silence. The only sounds were the clinking of spoons against plates and the television with the news on in the living room. Leo, sensitive as all children are, felt the tension. He looked at me, then at his dad, and asked in a low voice, "Did Mommy and Daddy have a fight?" Mark quickly pulled him close, stroking his head. "No, buddy, everything's fine," he said, but his voice trembled, as if he didn't believe it himself. I looked at Leo, my heart in a knot. He didn't deserve this. Didn't deserve to be trapped between the truth and a lie. Jessica cleared the plates in silence, glancing at me from the corner of her eye every now and then. Those glances were no longer those of a daughter-in-law, but silent warnings. I tried to act normal, poured Leo more water, but inside a storm was raging. I knew she was studying me, trying to guess how much I knew. After dinner, Jessica suddenly stood up, with an excuse. "I have something urgent from work. I have to step out for a moment." She put on her coat, grabbed her purse, and left before I could say anything. Mark just nodded, as if he were already used to his wife's unexpected departures. I stood by the window, watching Jessica's figure disappear under the dim streetlights. In the darkness, I saw her stop at the corner and pull out her phone. Her voice, though low, reached me through the slightly open window. "Julian," she whispered, in a tone full of anguish. I stood there paralyzed, my heart racing. That name again, like a ghost, confirming that what I saw on the iPad was no mistake. That night, when Leo was already asleep, I sat alone in the kitchen, under the dim light that illuminated my face. The fear still clung to me, but mixed with it was a fierce determination. I couldn't let my family fall apart. I couldn't let Leo grow up in a world of lies. I knew I had to do something, even if it meant facing the most painful truth. The next morning, while I was hanging laundry in the yard, the phone vibrated in the pocket of my apron, breaking the silence. I wiped my hands, feeling my heart pound as I saw Detective Harding's number on the screen. "Mrs. Miller, we need you to come to the station immediately to give us more information," his serious, no-nonsense voice said. I nodded, though he couldn't see me, and replied, "I'll be right there." I ran into the house. I checked that Leo was playing with his puzzles in the living room. The boy looked up and gave me an innocent smile, but his eyes still held a hint of yesterday's confusion. "Where are you going, Grandma?" he asked in his little voice. I stroked his head, forcing a smile. "I'm just running an errand, my love. Be good." "I'm going to ask Mrs. Peterson to watch you." Leo nodded, but I know he sensed my unease. I went to Mrs. Peterson's house, the neighbor who has been with my family for so many years. She was watering her potted plants in the yard, her gray hair peeking out from under a straw hat. "Rosa, can you watch Leo for a little while, please?" I asked, trying to keep my calm. Mrs. Peterson looked at me, her eyes full of concern. "Grace, something's not right, is it? I've seen you so tense since yesterday." I shook my head. I didn't want to drag her into this dangerous mess. "It's just my own things. Don't worry." "Mrs. Peterson nodded, but I know she didn't believe me. The police station was a noisy, busy place, with a thick air that smelled of sweat and paper. A young officer led me down a long hallway, the echo of my shoes resounding on the cold linoleum floor. They took me to a small conference room with tinted windows that hid the curious gazes from outside. Inside, Detective Harding was standing, arms crossed, with the same serious look as yesterday. Sitting next to him was a middle-aged woman, intelligent-looking, dressed in a dark blue pantsuit. She stood up and shook my hand with firmness and confidence. "I'm District Attorney Evelyn Reed," she introduced herself, her voice clear and decisive. "I'll be handling this case." D.A. Reed slid a thick folder toward me, filled with printed sheets of letters, numbers, and images. "This is what we extracted from your daughter-in-law's iPad," she said, pointing to a highlighted name on the first page. "Julian Vance. He is the director of a large pharmaceutical corporation. But he is also the prime suspect in a case we've been following for a long time." I turned the pages, feeling my heart beat faster as I saw the figures from the bank transactions. Millions of dollars moving between domestic and foreign accounts. Emails exchanged in a dry, professional language, but hiding something murky that I couldn't quite understand. But what left me breathless were the internal documents about inflated contracts and the production of counterfeit drugs. I saw photos of a factory with smokestacks spewing thick black smoke and a river of dark water flowing directly into the river near the industrial park. The same river where the neighborhood kids, including Leo, used to go swimming on hot days. I remembered the afternoons when Leo would come home, his hair soaked, excitedly telling me he had caught a little fish. The thought that that water could be poisoned made me shudder, and I gripped the edge of the table tightly. D.A. Reed was watching me. Her gaze was both stern and understanding. "We've been tracking Vance for a long time, but we didn't have direct evidence," she explained. "Your daughter-in-law's iPad is the key. It contains everything we need to dismantle this network." I nodded, but my mind was spinning. Jessica, whom I considered a daughter, was involved in something so horrible. I wanted to ask why. I wanted to understand how she could betray her family, but I had a lump in my throat and couldn't speak. Harding intervened. His voice grew deeper, full of warning. "But this also means that you and your grandson are in danger. If Vance or anyone in his network finds out that you've seen this, they won't just stand by." His words were like a bucket of cold water. I froze, my cold hands clasped together, feeling fear course through my entire body. I thought of Leo, of his innocent smile, of Mark, who was still blindly in love with his wife. If they found out I was cooperating with the police, what would happen? I left the station with my head feeling as heavy as lead. Outside, reporters were surrounding another suspect, with microphones everywhere and camera flashes going off nonstop. I pulled the brim of my hat down and walked quickly through the crowd, praying that no one would recognize me. On the city bus back home, I huddled in a corner seat, staring out the window without seeing anything but blurry images of the city. In my mind, there was only one thought. I had to protect Leo, no matter what. He is my light, the reason I keep living after so much pain. I couldn't let him get hurt. I couldn't let those shadows touch him. When I got home, I had barely opened the door when I saw Jessica sitting in the living room, a cup of coffee in her hand. She looked up and fixed her gaze on me, cold and inquisitive, as if trying to read on my face what I knew. "Where did you go, Mom?" "You were gone a long time," she asked, her voice soft but loaded with intent. I forced a smile, clutching my purse. "Oh, I went to the market to buy a few things," I replied, my voice trembling. Jessica nodded. But her eyes never left me, like a predator stalking its prey. The following days I lived like a shadow, silently observing everything in the house that was once my family's home. Every morning, I woke up with a heavy feeling, as if there was a stone in my chest. I tried to make Leo's days normal, taking him to school, making him breakfast, but my mind kept circling back to Jessica and the secrets she was hiding. I knew I had to be careful, to make everything seem normal. But Jessica's inquisitive gaze made me feel like I was walking on thin ice. During breakfast, I noticed that Jessica couldn't stop checking her phone. She sat across from me, her coffee mug in hand, but her eyes never left the screen. Every time a message came in, she would flip the phone over on the table, as if she was afraid someone would see. I pretended to be busy pouring milk for Leo, smiling at him as he told me about a drawing he had made in class. But not a single one of Jessica's movements escaped me. She seemed to live in her own world, a world where neither I, nor Mark, nor even Leo had a place. "Leo, finish your milk, sweetie, so I can take you to school," I said, trying to make my voice sound natural. Jessica looked up, glanced at me, and then lowered her head back to her phone. "I have an early meeting today," she told Mark, in a monotone voice. "I'll probably be a little late." Mark nodded, without asking further, as if he was already used to his wife's strange hours. I looked at him, with a pain in my soul. My son, that man who used to be strong and full of confidence, now seemed oblivious to the cracks spreading through his own family. That afternoon, Jessica said she had to go to an unexpected meeting. I was at the kitchen door, watching her put on a dark blue dress, perfume, and her hair perfectly styled. "What kind of meeting requires you to be so dressed up?" I let slip, trying to sound casual. Jessica turned and smiled, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Important clients are coming to the company, Mom," she replied, and quickly grabbed her purse and left. The door slammed shut, leaving a chilling silence. My gut told me something wasn't right. I couldn't just stand by. I couldn't let things continue like this without doing anything. I ran to Mrs. Peterson's house to leave Leo with her. "Neighbor, I have an emergency. Can you watch the boy for a little while?" I said, trying to hide the panic in my voice. Mrs. Peterson looked at me, worried. "Grace, you're acting very strange. If something's wrong, tell me. Don't keep it to yourself." I just shook my head, thanked her, and left in a hurry. I took a taxi, my heart pounding a mile a minute, and asked the driver to follow Jessica's car. "Please don't let her see that we're following her," I whispered, my eyes fixed on Jessica's white sedan ahead. The taxi driver glanced at me in the rearview mirror, but didn't ask any questions. He just nodded and sped up. Jessica's car stopped in front of an upscale mall, where the glass buildings shimmered in the sunday. I saw her get out, walking confidently, but looking around as if searching for someone. Then, a gleaming black SUV pulled up abruptly. A man in a suit and dark glasses got out and opened the door for her. I barely managed to see the license plate before Jessica got in and the SUV sped off, disappearing into traffic. I stayed there, gripping the seat, trying to memorize the license plate. The man's face was a blur, but the way Jessica got into the car, without hesitation, made me feel like I was being choked. I asked the taxi driver to take me home, my mind a mess. The image of the black SUV and Jessica's furtive glance haunted me, like a confirmation that what I saw on the iPad was no mistake. A few days later, they called me back to the station. In the small conference room, DA Reed and Detective Harding were waiting for me. "Mrs. Miller, do you have any new information?" Harding asked, with his penetrating gaze. I took a deep breath and told them what I had seen that day, from how Jessica left the house to the black SUV. I repeated the license plate, my voice trembling. Harding took notes and turned to another officer, giving him an order to check it immediately. A few minutes later, he returned and nodded. "It's Julian Vance's car." DA Reed passed me a file with a photo of Julian Vance, taken at a charity event. He was wearing an elegant suit, and his arrogant, fake smile sent a chill down my spine. "This is Jessica's lover and the mastermind of the entire network," DA Reed said, her voice grave but firm. "He's behind the production of counterfeit drugs and money laundering. Your daughter-in-law's iPad has given us the evidence to get closer to arresting him." I looked at the photo, feeling my blood run cold. Julian Vance. That name was no longer just a ghost, but a real person, with a fake smile and cold eyes. I thought of Jessica, of how she continued to act like the perfect wife in front of Mark, and my soul ached. How could she live two lives on one hand, Leo's mother, and on the other, the accomplice of a man like Vance? That night, we were all watching TV, but I couldn't concentrate. Suddenly, on the news, there was a report praising Julian Vance for his great contributions to public health. His image on the screen, in the middle of a cheering crowd, left me frozen. The applause from the television was like hammer blows to my heart. I glanced at Jessica and saw that she was smiling, but it was a tense smile, as if she were trying to hide something. Mark didn't notice. He was focused on the screen, and Leo yawned, resting his head on my shoulder. Late at night, I got up for a glass of water, still restless. As I passed through the kitchen, I was surprised to see Jessica sitting there, in the dark, with only the light from her phone illuminating her face. I quickly hid behind the door, my heart racing. Jessica was whispering into the phone, her voice sweet but full of tension. "I love you, Julian," she said, with a happy smile I had never seen her give to Mark. I stood there, rooted to the spot, feeling my world collapse once more. I silently returned to my room, lay down, but couldn't sleep. On Saturday night, the atmosphere in the house seemed a little lighter. Mark and Leo were sitting in front of the TV, watching a football game with enthusiasm. The shouts from the screen mingled with the laughter of father and son. I was in the kitchen, cutting fruit, trying to immerse myself in that rare moment of peace. But deep down, I knew it was all a facade. The fear and suspicion were still there, like a shadow that never left. Jessica came into the living room, smiled tenderly at Leo, and then turned to Mark. "I need to make a work call," she said, in a soft voice, as if it were nothing. "It's an urgent team meeting, you know." Mark nodded without taking his eyes off the screen. "Sure, honey. Go ahead," he replied, unconcerned. Jessica went into the small study at the end of the hall and closed the door. I put down the knife and looked at the fruit platter, feeling a deep unease. I don't know what prompted me, but my feet carried me down the hallway on their own. As I passed the study door, I heard Jessica's voice, harsh and tense, completely different from the sweetness she had just shown. "It's not possible," she almost shouted, her voice trembling. "The police have the iPad. If everything comes out, we're finished." I stopped in my tracks, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. A man's voice, deep and cold, replied through the speakerphone, loud enough for me to hear every word. "Calm down, Jess. If that old woman dares to open her mouth, we'll have to make her pay. Do you understand?" I stood frozen, my feet glued to the floor. That old woman. I knew he meant me. The threat was like a sharp knife that plunged into my heart, making me feel that the danger was no longer a distant worry, but a reality closing in. Inside, Jessica was silent for a moment, and then she replied in a low but determined voice. "I know. I'll take care of it." I tiptoed back so as not to make a sound and ran back to the kitchen. I stood there, gripping the edge of the table, trying to catch my breath. My breathing was ragged, as if I had run a marathon. I looked at the fruit platter, the perfectly cut pieces of mango and watermelon, and told myself I had to act normal. If Jessica found out I had overheard her, if she suspected I was watching her, I didn't dare to think what would happen to Leo, to Mark, to this whole family. A moment later, Jessica came out of the study, her face impassive, but as soon as she saw Mark and Leo, she forced a radiant smile, as if that terrifying call had never happened. "Who wants fruit?" she asked in a syrupy voice, taking the platter from my hands. Leo shouted with joy and ran to his mom, while Mark smiled and hugged him. I stood there watching the scene, but with a cold feeling in my soul. How could she act so well? How could she smile at her son when she had just been plotting such dark things? That night, the atmosphere in the house became more tense than ever. Leo accidentally spilled a glass of milk on the table, something insignificant that at any other time no one would have noticed. But Jessica exploded, her eyes flashing with fury. "It's all your fault," she shouted at him, her voice sharp. "All the problems are because of you." Leo stood there stunned, his round little eyes filled with fear, on the verge of tears. I understood immediately that she was referring to Leo taking the iPad to school, but her words were too cruel for a 7-year-old. Mark jumped to his feet, put a hand on his wife's shoulder, and said, bewildered, "Jess, what are you saying? He's just a kid." Jessica forced a smile, but it was a grimace that couldn't hide her tension. "Sorry," she said, softening her voice. "I'm just really tired today. Don't mind me." She bent down to clean up the spilled milk, but shot me a look from the corner of her eye, like a silent warning. I hugged Leo, who was sobbing with his face buried in my shoulder. "It's not your fault, my love," I whispered, stroking his back. "Grandma is here. I will always protect you." But inside, I knew I was facing a danger much greater than I had imagined. I couldn't sleep all night. The threat from that man's voice, surely Julian Vance, echoed in my ears. If that old woman dares to open her mouth. I lay there, the pale moonlight streaming through the window, illuminating the family photo hanging on the wall. It was from Leo's birthday last year, when we were all laughing happily. Now, Jessica's smile in that photo sent shivers down my spine. I thought of Leo, of Mark, and I wondered if I would have the strength to face what was coming. The next morning, I decided I couldn't wait any longer. I once again left Leo with Mrs. Peterson, telling her I was going to the market, but in reality, I went straight to the station. In the small conference room, DA Evelyn Reed was waiting for me, her gaze sharp but understanding. I told her the entire conversation I had overheard. Every detail, from Jessica's agitated voice to Julian's cold threat. He said if I opened my mouth, they would make me pay, I told her, my voice trembling. DA Reed nodded, taking notes, and then looked at me. "This information is very important, Mrs. Miller," she said in a firm voice. "It proves that Jessica is directly involved with Julian in covering up the crime. We are going to intensify surveillance on her." I left the station feeling a little lighter for having shared the burden, but the fear didn't leave me. On the way back, as the bus passed a familiar corner, I caught a glimpse of the black SUV I had seen at the mall. It was parked silently in the shade of a tree, and its headlights flashed once, like a warning. I shivered and clutched the handkerchief I carried in my purse. The danger was no longer a distant worry. It was right in front of me, closer than ever. After that meeting at the station, I returned home with my heart in a knot. DA Reed had told me they had enough grounds to request a warrant to tap Jessica's phone, and that a technical team had already discreetly installed a device on the cell phone she always carried. "Mrs. Miller, you must act completely natural," the DA warned me with her serious gaze. "Under no circumstances can you let her suspect anything. If she finds out you're cooperating with us, everything will become much more dangerous." I nodded, but inside, a storm of fear and determination was raging. I couldn't let Leo, my only light, be pulled into this vortex. The following days, I lived like an actress, trying to maintain my composure in front of Jessica. Every morning, I continued to make coffee, prepare breakfast for Leo, laughing with him as if nothing were wrong. But every time I looked at Jessica, I had to suppress the anger and pain that burned inside me. She continued to play her role as the perfect wife, hugging Leo, asking Mark about his work, but her eyes always passed over me, scrutinizing, as if searching for a crack in the facade of normality I had built. One afternoon, my phone vibrated. It was Detective Harding. "Mrs. Miller, we need you to come to the station immediately," he said with an urgent voice. I quickly left Leo with Mrs. Peterson. I lied, saying I was going to the market, and took a taxi to the station. In the small conference room, it was just Harding, DA Reed, and me. The tension was so thick I could hardly breathe. Harding turned on a small recorder on the table, and Jessica's voice echoed, clear and cold, like a stab to my heart. "Mark is nothing," she said, her tone full of contempt. "I only need you, Julian. When all this blows over, we'll go to Miami together. And the kid? Who cares? That's what the old woman is for." I collapsed into the chair, feeling the world cave in on me. My heart felt crushed. Jessica, the mother Leo loved, the wife Mark blindly trusted, was capable of saying such cruel words. She was not only betraying Mark, but she was willing to abandon Leo, the son she had rocked in her arms and sung to sleep every night. I covered my face. The tears flowed uncontrollably. "How could she?" I whispered, my voice broken. Harding handed me a glass of water. His gaze softened but remained stern. "I know this is very difficult, Mrs. Miller," he said. DA Reed continued in a soft but firm voice. "Now you have irrefutable proof to show your son. We will support you, but you need to be strong." I nodded, drying my tears. But in my mind, there was only one thought. Mark had to know the truth, even if it destroyed him. That night, I took the recording home, my soul heavy. Leo was playing with his blocks in the living room, and Mark had just gotten home from work, taking off his jacket. I waited for Leo to go to his room, and then took Mark out to the patio. The night wind was blowing, bringing the coolness of autumn. "Mark, I need you to listen to this," I said in a trembling voice, handing him the small recorder Harding had given me. Mark looked at me, his eyes full of doubt. "Again with this, Mom? I already told you I don't want to hear any more nonsense stories about Jess." I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. Just listen to it, Mark. Just this once. If I'm wrong, I will never mention it again. He hesitated, but finally took the recorder. As Jessica's voice echoed, I saw Mark's face change. Doubt turned to shock, and then to a deathly pallor. Maybe it's edited, he muttered, but his voice trembled, as if he didn't believe his own words. Just then, my phone rang. It was Harding. I put it on speaker, and his serious voice resonated. "Mrs. Miller, I have sent you this recording from the official surveillance system. It is authentic evidence, without any alteration." Mark sank into a chair, holding his head in his hands, his eyes bloodshot. Leo ran out of his room, sensing the tension. "What's wrong, Daddy?" he asked with a worried voice, clinging to Mark's hand. He could only hug his son tightly, unable to say a word. I knelt down, stroked Leo's head, forcing a smile. "Nothing's wrong, my love. Your daddy is just a little tired." That night, Jessica arrived late. She walked in with her perfect smile, but when she saw Mark's expression, her smile froze. Mark looked at her, but his eyes were different. There was no longer tenderness, but a pain mixed with rage. Still, he tried to seem normal. "Everything okay at the meeting, honey?" he asked. Jessica nodded with a soft voice. "Yes, everything's fine, darling. Just a little tired." I stood there, watching her act, my heart broken. She didn't know that Mark had heard the recording. She didn't know that her curtain of lies was about to fall. The air in the house felt dense, heavy. Leo, sensing the tension, quietly went to his room to play alone with his teddy bear. I looked at him, a lump in my throat. He didn't deserve this, didn't deserve to be trapped between the truth and a lie. I wanted to hug him, tell him everything would be okay, but I knew I couldn't promise him anything at that moment. A few days later, D.A. Reed came to the house unannounced. She was wearing a long coat, and her gaze was serious. "Mrs. Miller, we have news," she said in a grave voice. "The surveillance data shows that Jessica and Julian are planning to escape. They've already bought plane tickets to Miami. We have to act now." I sank into the armchair, feeling the floor open up beneath me. Jessica was not only betraying Mark, but she was going to abandon Leo, to leave everything behind to be with Julian. I looked at the DA, my voice trembling. "What do I do now?" "Leo, he can't lose his mother like this." D.A. Reed put a hand on my shoulder. Her gaze was firm but compassionate. "We need your cooperation," she said. "Keep watching, Jessica. Inform us of any strange movements, and prepare for the worst." Her words were like a knife. They sent a shiver down my spine. What was the worst, that Leo would lose his mother, that Mark would end up with a broken heart, or that my family would be dragged into even greater danger? That early morning, I woke up with a terrible sense of unease. I was washing the dishes when the phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Detective Harding. His voice was urgent, direct. "Mrs. Miller, we've just discovered that Jessica bought emergency plane tickets to Miami. The flight leaves from Chicago's O'Hare Airport tonight." I stood frozen. The plate I was holding nearly slipped from my hands. Miami. The word echoed in my head like a sharp knife. Jessica was really going to escape, to leave Mark, to leave Leo, to leave everything to go with Julian Vance. "Are you listening to me?" Harding's voice brought me back to reality. "Yes, I hear you," I answered, my voice trembling. "What do I need to do?" He spoke quickly. "We're going to move in, but you need to tell Mark. He has to know the truth, and we need both of your cooperation." I nodded, though he couldn't see me, and hung up, my heart a stone. I immediately thought of Mark, my son, who was still living in the blind faith he had for the woman he loved. I couldn't let him continue to deceive himself. I put on a coat, left Leo with Mrs. Peterson, and took a taxi to the construction site where Mark worked. When I arrived, he was standing by a pile of bricks, sweating, with a tired look in his eyes. He was surprised to see me. "Mom, what are you doing here? Did something happen?" I took him to a corner where no one could hear us. Tears almost escaped as I told him. "Mark, you have to come with me. Jessica. She's going to run away. She bought plane tickets to Miami with Julian Vance. You have to see the truth with your own eyes. If you don't, you'll regret it for the rest of your life." Mark looked at me. His eyes were torn between disbelief and pain. He shook his head, his voice hoarse. "Mom, again with this?" "I don't." I took his hands, interrupting him. "Mark, I'm begging you, just this once. If I'm wrong, I will never mention it again." He was silent for a long time, his eyes red, and finally he nodded. "Okay, Mom, I'll go." I hugged him, feeling my own heart break. I knew this truth would destroy my son, but I couldn't let him live a lie. In the afternoon, the police picked us up. In the car, Harding explained the plan, his voice calm but determined. "We have undercover agents who will pose as passengers. A team will be at the security checkpoint, and another will be waiting at the boarding gate. Mrs. Miller, Mark, you just have to be there and confirm the identity of Jessica and Vance. Don't do anything to arouse suspicion." I nodded, clutching the sweat-soaked handkerchief in my hand. Mark sat beside me in silence, his gaze lost out the window, as if searching for a moment of peace before the storm. At O'Hare Airport, the atmosphere was a chaos of noise and people. The flight announcements mixed with conversations, but to me, it was all a distant murmur. They took us to a discreet corner in the waiting area, from where we could see without being seen. I sat next to Mark, holding his hand tightly. He said nothing, but I could feel the tension in his every breath. "Mom, if all of this is true," he whispered, his voice broken. I squeezed his hand, not daring to answer, only whispering back, "I'm here, Mark, we'll get through this." At the designated time, I saw Jessica appear. She was wearing a long gray coat, dark sunglasses, and was pulling a large suitcase. Beside her was Julian Vance, in an elegant suit, walking with an air of superiority. They were laughing and talking, like a couple about to embark on a romantic trip. Seeing it, I felt a pain that tore my soul apart. I glanced at Mark and saw him frozen, as stiff as a statue. His eyes were red, his hands clenched into fists. "Do you see now?" I whispered, my voice trembling, holding back tears. Just as Jessica handed her passport to the airline employee, the space was shattered by a firm shout. "Police! Nobody move! Julian Vance and Jessica Miller, you are under arrest." It all happened in an instant. The undercover agents appeared from nowhere and surrounded them. Julian tried to run, but two burly men immediately tackled him to the ground. Jessica screamed and struggled, her voice shrill. "You're mistaken. I'm innocent. I didn't do anything." Mark ran towards her, unable to hold back any longer. "Why, Jess?" he shouted, his voice broken with pain. "Why did you do it? Me, Leo, this family. You threw it all away for him?" Jessica turned, her eyes terrified, but she quickly regained her composure and said coldly, "You don't understand, Mark. You would never understand." Her words were like a stab that left Mark motionless, his face pale. I ran to Leo, who was hiding behind me, his eyes wide with fear. I hugged him, covered his eyes with my hand, and whispered, "Don't look, my love. Grandma is here." Leo was trembling and asked in a tiny voice, "What's happening to Mommy, Grandma?" I didn't know what to answer. I just held him tighter, feeling his little heart beating at full speed. I wanted to protect him from that scene, from the cruel truth that his mother had chosen a path where he didn't fit. As the police led Jessica and Julian away, she turned abruptly. Her gaze locked onto mine, cold and full of hatred, as if I were the one to blame for destroying everything. I stood there, hugging Leo, watching her in handcuffs, feeling a mix of pain and relief. The truth had come to light, but it had also shattered my family. Mark stood motionless, his gaze empty, following his wife with his eyes as they took her away. I wanted to run and hug him, to tell him everything would be okay, but I knew that those words, at that moment, meant nothing. After the arrest at the airport, we were taken directly to the station to give our statements. The squad car moved silently through the busy streets of the city, but I had no mind for anything other than Leo, who was curled up against me, trembling, his little hands clinging to my clothes as if he feared that if he let go, he would lose me forever. I held him tightly, trying to give him some warmth to calm his fear, but I myself was in the midst of a storm of emotions. Mark sat beside me, as absent as a shadow, his eyes red and his gaze lost out the window. He said nothing, but I knew his heart was in pieces. At the station, the air was thick, filled with the incessant ringing of telephones and the hurried footsteps of officers. They took us to a small waiting room where the cold metal chairs made me feel even more alone. I held Leo in my arms, stroking his back and whispering, "Everything is going to be okay, my love." But my words sounded empty, as if I didn't believe them myself. From the interrogation room, just a few steps away, came Jessica's screams, sharp and desperate. "I'm innocent. I don't know anything. You're making a mistake." The furious slam of the DA's fist on the table silenced her voice, but each of Jessica's words was like a knife in my heart. She continued to deny everything, clinging to her perfect facade, even when everything had crumbled. Hours passed in that cold waiting room. Leo fell asleep on my lap, and his steady breathing was the only thing that kept me sane. Mark was still there, without a word, his hands clenched so tight they turned white. I wanted to say something to comfort him, but what words could soothe the pain of someone who had just lost the world they believed in? Finally, an officer approached and allowed us to leave. "That's enough for today," he said in a dry voice. "We'll be in touch if we need more information." But as soon as we walked out the station door, a crowd of reporters surrounded us. The flashes of cameras blinded us, microphones were shoved in our faces, and questions rained down like a torrential storm. "What role did your family play in the Julian Vance case? How does it feel to have your daughter-in-law arrested?" I quickly covered Leo's face with my coat, terrified that his innocent gaze would be captured in the newspapers. Mark could barely walk, stumbling. I took his arm and helped him push through the crowd, praying for some peace. "We're not answering. Please, let us through," I shouted, my voice broken with exhaustion and anger. When we got home, Mrs. Peterson was waiting at the door, her gray hair disheveled and her eyes full of anguish. "Oh, Grace, I saw the news," she said in a trembling voice. "How could all this have happened?" I just shook my head, unable to speak. I felt the tears about to come, but I held them back, not wanting Leo to see me weak. "Thank you, neighbor," I said in a hoarse voice. "Go get some rest. I'm okay." But when Mrs. Peterson left, I felt the world crashing down on me. The house, once filled with the laughter of Leo and Mark, now felt cold and empty. That night, no one touched dinner. I made the chicken noodle soup that Leo loves so much, but he just stared at the bowl, his eyes sad. Mark sat alone in a corner of the living room, with a more than half-empty bottle of whiskey. He mumbled almost inaudibly. "My whole life, I trusted the wrong person." "I believed her, Mom." His words broke my heart. I wanted to run and hug him, tell him everything would be fine, but I knew those words were useless now. Mark had lost the wife he loved, and Leo, the mother he admired. Leo curled up beside me and asked in a whisper, "Grandma, where did Mommy go? Why isn't she coming back?" His question was like a dagger straight to my heart. I hugged him tightly as tears fell silently. "Mommy had to go far away for a while, my love," I said, trying to make my voice sound gentle. "But Grandma is here, and I will always be with you." Leo nodded, but I know he didn't understand. How could a 7-year-old boy understand that his mother had chosen a path where he had no place? That night, as I rocked Leo to sleep, the television in the living room broadcast the news. The image of Jessica, handcuffed and with her head down, being led through the hallways of the station, appeared on the screen. Leo, who was not yet fully asleep, saw it by accident. He burst into tears, and his cry of "Mommy" echoed in the dark room. I immediately hugged him and changed the channel, but that image was already seared into his mind. "Why does Mommy have handcuffs, Grandma?" he asked, tears streaming down his cheeks. I held him tighter, not knowing what to say. "I don't know, my love," I whispered, as my own tears fell. "But I promise I will protect you." After the news, my phone rang. It was D.A. Reed. "Mrs. Miller, thank you for your cooperation in this operation," she said, her voice serious but understanding. "We have arrested Julian Vance and Jessica, but the case is not over. I need you to prepare to be the main witness at the trial." I nodded, though she couldn't see me. "I understand," I replied, my voice hoarse. "I'll do what I have to do." The weeks following the arrest at the airport were a whirlwind, as if our entire world had been turned upside down. Mark took an unpaid leave from work to stay home and care for Leo. He didn't want the boy to face the curious stares or malicious questions from people. I watched my son, once a strong man, now gaunt. His eyes were always red, as if he had cried all the tears possible during the long, sleepless nights. I wanted to hug him, to say something to ease his pain, but I knew that no words could heal the wound Jessica had left. Leo, my little grandson, kept asking for his mom. "Grandma, when is Mommy coming back?" he would ask in his little voice, his round eyes full of hope. Every time he did, my heart would clench. I couldn't tell him the cruel truth that his mother had chosen a path where he didn't fit. Instead, I made up vague stories for him. I took him to the park, bought him ice cream, trying to fill the void in his little heart with brief moments of joy. But every time Leo smiled, I saw the hidden sadness in his eyes. At 7 years old, he was too young to understand, but old enough to feel the loss. I had to go to the station several times to speak with D.A. Reed and Detective Harding. They asked me to recount every detail, from what I saw on the iPad, the call I overheard, to the look of hatred from Jessica at the airport. Every time I told it, it was like reliving those horrible moments. But I knew I couldn't stop. "You're doing the right thing, Mrs. Miller," D.A. Reed would tell me, her gaze both stern and compassionate. "Thanks to you, we have dismantled a major criminal network." I would nod, but I felt no relief. Taking down Julian Vance's network was a victory, but my family had paid the price with wounds that would never heal. On the street, the reporters wouldn't leave us alone. They would camp out in front of the house, their cameras ready to snap anyone who came out. One time, I went to the market for vegetables, and as I was leaving, a group of them surrounded me. "How does it feel to be betrayed by your own daughter-in-law?" One of them shouted, his microphone almost in my face. "Did you know about her illegal activities?" I lowered my head and walked as fast as I could, clutching the grocery bag as if it were my only support. "Please, leave us alone," I told them in a trembling voice. But they didn't stop. When I got home, I locked the door securely, drew the curtains, trying to create a safe space for Leo and Mark, but I knew we couldn't hide forever. One night, when Leo was sound asleep, Mark sat next to me on the patio bench. The cool air was blowing, bringing the scent of pine. He put his hand on my shoulder, his voice choked. "Mom, I was so blind. I didn't believe you. I didn't want to see the truth. If it hadn't been for you, I would have lost everything." Tears streamed down his cheeks, and for the first time in weeks, I saw my son cry. I hugged him, patting his back, like when he was a little boy. "You didn't lose everything, Mark," I whispered. "You still have Leo, and you have me. We're going to get through this, son." He nodded, but I knew the pain in his heart wouldn't disappear so easily. The trial took place a few months later. I decided not to take Leo, even though he kept asking, "Grandma, I want to see my mom." I didn't want him to see her in the defendant's box. I didn't want that image to haunt him for the rest of his life. On the day of the sentencing, I sat in the front row, across from Jessica and Julian Vance. Jessica was convicted of complicity and money laundering, while Julian received the maximum sentence for leading the counterfeit drug and environmental pollution network. The case brought down several high-level officials, shaking the entire pharmaceutical industry. But seeing Jessica, with her head down and her hair disheveled, I felt no victory. I only saw a woman who had lost everything to ambition and lies. Returning home after the trial, I felt as if I were waking up from a long nightmare. Mark was at the door, greeting Leo, who was coming from Mrs. Peterson's house. The boy ran to hug me, saying cheerfully, "Grandma, I made a drawing at school today. I want you to see it." I smiled, stroking his head, relieved to see his innocent smile. We sat on the patio. I made a pot of chamomile tea, whose aroma filled the air. Mark sat next to me while Leo played in the garden, chasing a butterfly. The sunset was falling, painting the yard in gold, and for the first time in many months, I felt a bit of peace. I looked at Leo and thought about the painful path we had walked. Who would have imagined that, because of a simple iPad, a child took by mistake, a whole curtain of lies would come crashing down? That truth was painful. It shattered our family, but I would rather face it than live my whole life in a false happiness. I leaned over, gave Leo a kiss on the forehead, and felt his warmth. "I love you, my boy," I whispered, with a lump in my throat. Sitting there, under the sunset light, I promised myself that I would do everything possible to rebuild what was left of this family. Leo needed me, Mark needed me, and I needed them to keep on living. Life had taught me one last lesson. The truth, however cruel, is always worth facing, because only it can open the path to healing and starting anew. I watched Leo run through the garden. His smile was like a ray of sunshine dispelling the darkness. And I knew that, although the road ahead would be difficult, we would overcome it together, step by step. The story you have just heard has had names and places changed to protect the identity of those involved. We do not tell it to judge, but in the hope that someone will listen and stop to reflect. How many mothers are suffering in silence within their own homes? I truly wonder, if you were in my place, what would you do? Would you choose silence to keep the peace, or would you dare to face it all to reclaim your own voice? I would like to know your opinion, because every story can become a light that illuminates the path for others. God always blesses, and I am sure that courage will lead us to better days. For now, on the final screen, I will leave you with two of the channel's favorite stories. I am sure you will be surprised. Thank you for staying with me until this moment.